Hey guys, tonight we step onto a windswept shore where waves toss up secrets from faraway seas and the air tastes faintly of salt and pine resin. You stand there, feeling small in the immensity of the night sky, when a shadow much larger than any ship rises just beyond the surf. It isn't a monster, and it's definitely not here to charge admission like a theme park. Now, it's a giant. A kindly one. A little awkward, maybe, like that tall uncle who always ducks under door frames, but kind all the same. You probably won't survive this, at least not with your usual sense of scale. Giants tend to rearrange the furniture of your imagination, after all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing the patchwork of night owls scattered across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The giant shifts his feet in the sand, each step leaving hollows deep enough to hold puddles. He isn't hiding, not really. He just waits as if the sea itself has asked him to stand watch. His shoulders are broad like a cliff face, yet his posture is almost shy, hunched slightly, as though he knows how easily he could frighten anyone who stumbles too close. You edge nearer, crunching over shells and driftwood, and catch the faintest smile tugging at his face. The moonlight makes it easy to see the twinkle in his eyes. Eyes not unlike weathered glass marbles, the kind you might find forgotten in an attic box. He gives a nod that's more like a bow, and suddenly you feel less like a trespasser and more like a guest. A fun fact drifts in here. In many old Greek tales, giants are painted as terrifying. Think of the mighty Titans or the one-eyed Cyclops. Yet a quieter thread in the folklore whispers of gentle ones, keepers of remote places, more shepherd than warrior. Scholars still argue whether these stories were early cautionary tales or allegories for natural landmarks. A cliff can seem like a giant standing still, after all. But tonight's giant doesn't thunder. Instead, he waits. His silence hums with expectation, as though he's been standing on this shore for centuries, looking out for travelers who might need a friend. You wonder how many storms he's watched pass, how many ships he's seen swallowed by the sea, and whether he feels more kinship with the waves or the mortals they batter. He squats down carefully, like a crane lowering a delicate load, and traces a spiral in the sand with a finger the size of a mast. You realize it's not random. It's a welcome sign, like drawing a hearthrug in a home. Somewhere far down the beach, a night heron croaks, reminding you that despite the strange company, this is still Earth, still a coastline that belongs to tides and feathers and shifting winds. And then he speaks, voice deep but warm, like the bass line of a lullaby. "You've wandered far," he says, the words drawn out slowly, almost reluctant to disturb the night. You nod, though your voice catches somewhere between your throat and your courage. He chuckles, a sound less like thunder and more like an old wooden chest opening. Funny thing, if this were a movie, you'd expect him to demand tribute or roar about territory. Instead, he asks if you're hungry. Of course he does. Giants in folklore may throw boulders, but in the softer tales, they also tend to cook, in cauldrons large enough to double as swimming pools. The waves hush themselves for a moment as if listening. The giant tilts his head toward the horizon, where a storm still smolders, distant lightning flashing like a forgotten lighthouse. He seems to be waiting for someone, or something, besides you. You can't shake the feeling that his vigil has purpose, that this beach is less a lonely exile and more a chosen post. And maybe, just maybe, you're not the only one about to need his help.
The storm doesn't politely knock. It barges in like a drunk guest at a wedding. The horizon, already restless, suddenly unravels into streaks of lightning, and thunder mutters like an old man searching for his slippers. You stand beside the giant, and it feels strange, almost comical. The two of you, one as tall as a cliff, one barely tall enough to skip a stone, both watching the sea throw a tantrum. Then you see them, tiny dots on the dark water, tossed like corks in the froth. A ship, if you can call something half-broken a ship, slides closer, sails shredded and masts snapping like a toothpick. The crew clings to the rails, their faces pale and their cries nearly drowned by the roar of the waves. The storm is bad, but the real danger is that they don't know this coast. You can tell they're strangers to these waters. The giant doesn't hesitate. His massive hand dips into the tide as if scooping children out of a crowded pool. You expect the sailors to panic. After all, who wouldn't when a hand larger than your entire cabin comes reaching for you? But instead of screaming, they look stunned. Maybe it's exhaustion. Maybe it's relief. Maybe it's that strange instinct we all get when something enormous decides not to crush you, but to help. You watch as he places the sailors gently on the beach, one after another, as if laying chess pieces back in their box. Their captain, beard-soaked and cloak plastered to his frame, stumbles forward, attempting a bow that looks more like an accidental yoga pose. He mutters thanks in a dialect you half recognize. Ancient Greek, maybe? Or a blend of dialects long vanished. Either way, gratitude is universal enough. Fun fact, in Greek lore, sailors often prayed to Poseidon for safe passage. Some even tossed coins or livestock into the sea, though livestock doesn't float very well. What's curious is that scattered myths mention helpers besides gods. Strange island beings, mysterious voices, or yes, giants. Historians still argue if these were embellishments to explain sheer luck or faint memories of cultures who aided shipwrecked strangers. The sailors, bedraggled and dazed, collapse onto the sand. One of them, younger and louder than the rest, blurts out a nervous laugh. He says something about giant blessings and then sneezes so violently that half the group startles awake again. You chuckle too, because nothing ruins a mythic moment faster than a badly timed sneeze. The giant, unbothered, crouches down and regards the men as if checking to see whether they're cracked like pottery. His gaze is steady but kind. He asks, in his slow, rumbling way, if they're hungry. Of course he does. Giants and food, inseparable. You almost expect him to pull out a picnic basket the size of a wagon. The sailors exchange wary glances. They've likely heard the darker tales, giants who feast on men, not with them. Yet this giant's eyes glimmer like someone who's been waiting for company, not prey. One sailor even dares to mutter, "Better fed than dead," which gets him a playful shove from his companion. As they gather closer, dripping and shivering, the storm begins to soften, grumbling off toward some other unlucky coastline. The air smells sharper, fresher, the way the world feels after someone finally turns off a noisy fan. The giant leans back, his knees like two rounded hills in the sand, and sighs. It's not the sigh of someone weary of life, it's the sound of a host finally relieved to see his guests arrive alive. For a moment, no one speaks, just the hiss of foam, the crackle of lightning fading far away, and the giant's steady breathing. Then, gently, he motions with his hand, as if inviting everyone, yes, even you, deeper inland. Somewhere, perhaps, bread waits to be broken.
The giant leads you and the sailors across the damp sand, his footsteps thudding softly, like the muffled beat of a distant drum. He moves carefully, trying not to trip over dunes or crush the odd crab making its midnight commute. You trail behind, shoes squelching, stomach growling louder than you'd like. The sailors notice it too, Half of them eye you with the look of men who'd wrestle a loaf of bread away from a saint. The giant pauses by a grove of wind-bent olive trees, their silver leaves shimmering in the moonlight. With a slow smile, he reaches into a woven sack slung across his back. Out come round loaves, still warm as if the sun had just set them out to cool. The scent makes your knees go weak. Nutty grain, hints of honey, a whisper of salt air baked into the crust. Bread like this feels like cheating, comfort without effort. The sailors hesitate at first. Bread this large, big enough that one slice could double as a raft, seems too good to be real. The youngest sailor pokes it with his dagger, then quickly licks the blade. "It's bread," he says, wide-eyed. "Actual bread!" His comrades scold him for weaponized snacking, but soon they're all tearing pieces off, chewing greedily, faces softening as hunger gives way to relief. Here's a quirky tidbit. In ancient Greece, bread wasn't just food. It was often dipped in wine, used as a spoon for stew, even offered to the gods. Some myths claim Demeter herself taught humans how to bake, though historians argue over which culture truly invented bread. One scholar even joked that bread has so many origin stories, it's basically the Marvel universe of food. The giant doesn't eat with them. Instead, he watches, content, as if feeding strangers is his reward. You notice how his smile deepens every time a sailor groans with pleasure after a bite. When one sailor drops his crumb in the sand, the giant leans down and carefully blows it away, leaving the piece clean. That small act, oddly tender, speaks louder than any feast. You bite into your own share. It's warm, airy, and a little chewy, the way bread should be when baked with love, not machinery. You're tempted to ask if he has butter the size of a boulder or maybe a barrel of olive oil, but you hold your tongue. The giant seems to sense it anyway, chuckling softly. He gestures inland again, promising more comforts to come. The sailors, now drowsy from food, laugh a little too freely. One tells a joke about Poseidon's hair looking like seaweed, though frankly, it probably did. Another compares the giant's hands to ship sails, then nervously clarifies that he means it as a compliment. Even you laugh, though you're half afraid the giant might take offense. But he just shrugs, amused, clearly used to awkward sailors trying to balance gratitude with nerves. As the night air cools, the crackling hunger in everyone eases, you realize the giant's true gift isn't bread at all. It's the calm that comes when you no longer feel desperate. Food in your belly, shelter ahead, and a giant on your side. Suddenly, the world feels survivable again. The giant rises, taller than the trees, and waves his hand for you all to follow once more. The sailors stumble to their feet, wiping crumbs from beards and tunics, grumbling half-heartedly like children told to leave a bakery too soon. You tuck your last bite into your mouth and follow, knowing the story isn't finished.
The path curves inland, where the salty tang of the sea softens into the earthy aroma of pine needles and damp soil. You and the sailors shuffle along behind the giant, your bellies pleasantly full, your steps lighter than they have any right to be after nearly drowning. The moon hangs low, watching like a nosy neighbor, while fireflies blink in and out of existence, nature's way of reminding you that even bugs can do light shows. The giant slows near a clearing. He kneels, and with one sweep of his enormous hand, brushes away a layer of leaves and twigs. Beneath, a ring of stones encircles a bed of glowing embers, like a campfire that's been politely waiting for company. He exhales gently, and the embers flare back to life, flames licking upward as though they've just been told the party can begin. The sailors gather close, grateful for the warmth. Their clothes steam as the fire chases the chill from the night air. The captain, ever dramatic, spreads his cloak and sits as though presiding over a council,
while the youngest sailor immediately begins roasting a crumb of leftover bread on a stick. It falls into the flames within seconds, of course, but he insists it adds flavor. The giant settles opposite you, cross-legged, his knees like boulders at the edge of the circle. The flickering light paints his face in bronze and shadow, emphasizing his calm eyes and that small, knowing smile. Without a word, he gestures for the sailors to speak. They hesitate, unused to being asked to tell their stories rather than commanded. Finally, one pipes up. He tells of a voyage that began in Corinth, of trading jars of oil for fine cloth, of storms that seemed ordinary until they weren't. He embellishes, of course, sailors always do. Another sailor jumps in, describing dolphins racing the ship, claiming one winked at him. The others groan, rolling their eyes. You laugh, imagining dolphins gossiping like locals at a cafe. Here's the history slip-in. Greek sailors genuinely believed dolphins were omens of good fortune. Some even thought the souls of the dead could ride them across the waves. Scholars debate whether this was pure symbolism or if early encounters with unusually curious dolphins sparked entire mythologies. Either way, you'd definitely take a dolphin cab ride if offered. As the sailors trade tales, the fire pops and hisses, throwing sparks into the night. One of them mimics a sea monster's roar so badly it sounds like a donkey hiccuping. The youngest sailor, still sore about losing his breadcrumb, declares he once arm-wrestled a cyclops. The laughter that follows is so loud it startles an owl from a nearby branch. You nearly choke on your sip of water because, honestly, the thought of this skinny lad taking on a cyclops is comedy gold. The giant sits quietly, his face a portrait of patience. Every so often, his smile broadens, and he nods in approval. You get the sense that he values their voices, their small human dramas, more than they realize. To a being who has probably heard the silence of centuries, a badly told joke about sea monsters might be priceless. By the time the last sailor finishes his tale, the fire has mellowed into a steady glow, and the night feels less like a trial and more like a shared living room, just one with very drafty walls. The giant leans back, resting on his hands, gazing towards the stars, as if weighing how many more stories the night might hold. But for now, he lets the silence stretch, warm and unhurried, like the last note of a lullaby. The fire hums low, a comfortable crackle filling the pauses left by the sailors' rambling tales. You lean against a rock that's conveniently shaped like a chair, though you suspect it's really just your aching back pretending to be grateful. The giant tilts his head, as if weighing the worth of words, then finally begins to speak. His voice isn't booming, as you might expect. It's steady, patient, like someone reading aloud to a child afraid of the dark. He talks of other giants, those you've heard about and those you haven't. Titans, towering figures of primordial power who once wrestled with the gods themselves. The sailors shift uneasily at that name, as if the mere mention of Titans might wake them from some eternal slumber. Then he mentions Cyclopes, the one-eyed craftsman, forging thunderbolts for Zeus and tools for Hephaestus. One sailor, a wiry fellow with eyes too wide for comfort, mutters that he once glimpsed a cyclope on Sicily. The captain sighs and mutters, "You also claim to see mermaids doing synchronized swimming." Laughter rolls around the circle. Here's your mainstream fact check. Hesiod and Homer describe giants differently, sometimes monstrous, sometimes heroic. Scholars still bicker over whether they were metaphors for natural disasters, like volcanoes and earthquakes, or genuine mythological species. And then there's the quirky tidbit. Some rural villages in Greece point to massive bones unearthed in hillsides, saying they belonged to giants. Modern science insists they were ancient mammoths or mastodons, but honestly, which makes a better fireside story? The giant chuckles at the skepticism, the sound deep enough to rattle your ribs. "Not all giants are made for battle," he says, his words rolling like slow surf. You feel a shiver, not from cold, but from the honesty tucked into that statement. A life measured not in wars, but in centuries of patient watching. A sailor blurts out, "So, you're not a Titan, then?" The question hangs awkwardly, like asking a stranger at dinner if they're on parole. The giant simply shakes his head. "No chains bind me. No wrath drives me. I am only what I am," which is the kind of answer that manages to be both completely clear and totally confusing. You think of modern metaphors, like someone saying they're just between jobs, only their job is spanning entire epochs. The sailors whisper among themselves, debating whether giants like him are protectors or just oversized hermits. Folklorists would love this debate. Some argue that giants were invented as stand-ins for forgotten ancestors, larger-than-life guardians haunting the edges of memory. Others believe they were always cautionary figures, warnings not to wander too far. The giant scratches a pattern into the dirt with one finger, swirling waves, a boat, and then a great hand lifting it. It's not just doodling, it's a record, perhaps even a prophecy. You realize he's drawing your night into the sand, a story about saving sailors, not devouring them. In 1,000 years, maybe someone will stumble on these lines and wonder if it's just erosion or evidence. The fire dims to embers again, shadows stretching like tired cats. You yawn without meaning to. One sailor, catching your drift, mutters, "If he's telling bedtime stories, he's doing a decent job." The giant smiles at that, and for a moment you swear the stars above smile too.
The embers fade to a soft orange glow, and the giant motions for everyone to follow once more. His stride slows as he leads you into a cleft in the hillside, where the air cools and the ground becomes slick with moss. You duck instinctively, though the ceiling is high enough to let him stroll upright. The sailors shuffle nervously behind you, muttering about caves being convenient places for man-eaters to stash leftovers. One even whispers, "If he starts sharpening cutlery, I'm out." But the cave doesn't smell like danger. It smells like damp stone, wild thyme, and something faintly sweet, like honey, seeping from the walls. And then you see it. Faint light, soft and green, glowing from moss spread across the rock like a painter's brushstroke. It's not fire, not flame, just a natural lantern, alive and breathing. The sailors gasp, one swearing loudly enough to echo 3 times. Fun fact: Greeks once believed caves were gateways to the divine, sacred to gods like Pan or nymphs who guarded springs. Some scholars argue they were seen as wombs of the earth itself, birthing life and shelter. Others believed they were feared, places where the underworld breathed too close. Your cave? Well, it feels more like a gentle Airbnb carved by nature. The giant gestures toward a wide stone ledge. He's prepared it somehow. Woven mats of reeds, furs of mountain goats, even clay jars filled with water that reflects the moss light. You can't help but notice how much care went into arranging it all. Not just survival, comfort. This isn't a lair, it's a home. The sailors ease down, stretching legs sore from too much salt water and panic. One jokes that he'll give the cave a 5-star review if he survives checkout. The youngest sailor, always eager, presses his face close to the glowing moss. "Can we take some?" he whispers. The captain smacks the back of his head, muttering about cursed souvenirs. You lean against the wall, tracing your fingers across grooves etched into the stone. Shapes, Ships, storms, and towering figures line the walls like a bedtime comic strip. It dawns on you that the giant has been recording not just night, but countless nights, each carving a memory of those he's helped, each glowing moss patch a page in his endless journal. And here's the scholarly debate. Were giants truly part of myth, or were they just a poetic way of saying, "This mountain saved us," or "This cave sheltered us"? Folklorists can't agree if these beings were real to ancient minds or if they were metaphors carved larger than life. The sailors argue about it too, voices echoing in the cave, until one quips, "Doesn't matter, he's real enough to squash us, and that's proof enough." The giant laughs at this, deep and rolling, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. Not menacing, more like the laughter of someone who knows his own strength but prefers gentleness. He lowers himself onto a ledge, his weight making the ground hum, and offers another loaf of bread. The sailors groan. They've already eaten enough to sink them, but still they nibble. You settle deeper into the moss glow, the air cool and steady, the fire outside forgotten. You can almost imagine falling asleep here, safe under the careful watch of someone who could crush you, but instead chooses to shelter you. And that realization, oddly enough, makes your eyelids heavy.
The cave is hushed, but outside the sea refuses to rest. Its steady breathing drifts into the cavern, a rhythm as old as the gods. The sailors, now relaxed enough to loosen their boots, start mumbling songs. At first, it's a jumble of half-forgotten verses. Think karaoke night without lyrics on the screen. But slowly, the melodies align. One voice rises, then another, until the cave itself becomes an instrument. The giant leans forward, elbows on knees, and listens intently. His massive head sways just slightly, as though he's trying not to overwhelm the rhythm. It's almost funny, this colossal figure, careful not to clap offbeat like your least musical uncle. The sailor's song is a ballad, something about home harbors and lovers who may or may not have waited. The refrain is simple, rising and falling like the tide. You don't understand every word. Dialects twist Old Greek into something more like music than speech. But the emotion needs no translation. Homesickness hums in every note. And here's the folklore nugget. Greek sailors truly did sing to the sea. Songs weren't just entertainment, they were offerings, meant to keep Poseidon calm or to charm sea nymphs into gentleness. Some historians argue these chants doubled as work songs for rowing, while others claim they were a kind of magic, where sound stitched fragile hope to reality. The giant clears his throat, and suddenly the air vibrates. When he joins in, his voice is lower than anything human, a deep drone that rattles the walls and makes your bones hum like tuning forks. The sailors' eyes widen. They hadn't expected him to sing, let alone harmonize like a temple organ. But instead of ruining the song, his voice anchors it. Their higher notes dance above his bass, like gulls circling a steady current. One sailor, emboldened, tries to mimic the giant's low note and nearly passes out. The captain snorts, calling him a frog in disguise, which gets a round of laughter that somehow doesn't break the spell. Even the giant chuckles mid-harmony, his shoulders shaking. For a moment, you catch yourself swaying too. The song doesn't just fill your ears, it presses into your chest, tickling old memories. Nights when you hummed to yourself to stay awake, or when a lullaby made the world feel less sharp. This song has that same effect, a steadying thread weaving everyone together. Sailors, wanderer, giant. And here's the scholarly debate. Was music in these myths Really divine communication, or just human ingenuity trying to cope with endless waves? Folklorists split on this. Some say it was a way of making sense of chaos. Others argue it was a genuine belief that gods tuned in to melody. Maybe both. Maybe the point was never the gods, but the comfort in the singing. The song fades, leaving the cave still humming. The sailors exhale in unison, like children who just finished a story time. One mumbles, "Not bad for a giant," which earns him a playful nudge from his neighbor. You smile, because honestly he wasn't just not bad. He was the heart of the whole song. The giant leans back, eyes half closed, as if savoring the echo still floating around the cavern. His face softens, peaceful in a way that makes you wonder how long it's been since he last sang with anyone. Maybe centuries, maybe never. Tonight, though, he isn't just a guardian, he's part of the choir.
The fire has settled into that perfect stage. Glowing coals, a few gentle cracks, and an orange light that paints shadows across the cavern walls. The sailors huddle closer, not because they're cold, but because the atmosphere feels like story hour. You can tell, they've got that look people get when they're itching for a tale to carry them away. The giant notices too. He shifts, rests his chin on one fist, and rumbles, "Would you like to hear a story?" His voice is low, but the question is almost shy, as though he's asking permission rather than assuming command. The sailors nod eagerly, some too quickly, like kids pretending they're not sleepy even though they are. He begins. His words are slow, like waves brushing sand, each sentence landing with the weight of years. He tells of ancient storms, of nights when ships vanished without a trace, and others when a mysterious light guided them home. His story centers on a great lantern said to be lit by the goddess Hestia herself, hidden in a mountain cave. Sailors claimed its flame could cut through the blackest fog. Now here's the historical nugget. Greek mythology often tied firelight to divine protection. Temples kept eternal flames burning, and sailors carried small embers from those fires aboard ships, believing they brought luck. Some historians think these myths merged with real phenomena, like St. Elmo's fire, those eerie blue sparks that flicker on a ship's mast during electrical storms. To sailors, that looked like divine lanterns in the sky. The giant pauses in his tale, poking the fire as though stoking memory itself. He describes how he once saw that flame, or maybe dreamt it. He's not sure. His words tumble into the debate folklorists still argue over. Did such a lantern ever exist, or was it just the imagination of men too long at sea? Some call it metaphor. Others swear it was real. The uncertainty is part of the charm. The sailors lean in, eyes catching the flicker of the current fire, as if they're hoping it might suddenly blaze into that legendary flame. One jokes, "If Hestia really wanted us home, she could have just handed us a map." Another whispers that he wouldn't mind a goddess-lit lantern guiding him out of his gambling debts. The laughter is quiet, but warm, rolling like surf. The giant doesn't mind the interruptions. In fact, his eyes sparkle, like he enjoys seeing them weave themselves into the tale. And then he does something unexpected. He plucks up a smooth stone, big enough that a sailor would struggle to lift it, but for him, it's a pebble. With a flick of his massive wrist, he holds it up so the firelight dances across its surface. "Every story," he says, "leaves a stone behind. You carry them without knowing. Some weigh heavy, others shine." He places the rock back beside the fire, as though it belongs there now, a symbol of the tale just told. And here's where you feel it. His stories aren't just about myths or gods, they're about keeping people afloat. You notice the sailors relax more with each word, their shoulders easing, their laughter coming easier. Like the song before, the story isn't just entertainment, it's medicine. You catch yourself wondering how many other stories he has, probably thousands. Maybe he's a walking library, one no scholar could ever catalog. Tonight, though, you only need this one, a tale of a lantern, half real, half divine, that makes the dark sea feel a little less endless. The fire pops, startling one sailor, who yelps and swats at his beard as though sparks might have taken residence there. The giant chuckles. His laugh fills the cavern in a way that almost feels protective, like the walls themselves are reassured. The story lingers, even as silence creeps back. You can feel its weight, like that stone beside the fire, settling into memory. Not heavy, not burdensome, just present. Something to carry forward.
Morning arrives slowly inside the cavern. You wake not with alarm, but with a soft ache in your back, the kind you get when stone is your mattress. The sailors stir, too, groaning and stretching like cats who have no business being at sea. The fire has burned down to a glow, and outside you can hear the hush of tide returning. The giant is already awake, sitting near the cavern's mouth, legs dangling as though he's just another fisherman waiting for the catch. He holds something in his enormous hands. A net, mended with twine so fine it's almost laughable compared to his size. The sailors gather around, curiosity overriding hunger. One mutters, "That net's like a spider's web for minnows." But the giant smiles, explaining in that calm thunder voice of his that not all strength comes from size. Sometimes the smallest stitch holds the largest tear. He shows them how to weave the strands, his fingers moving with surprising delicacy. It looks ridiculous at first, like a bear threading a needle, but it's oddly graceful. Now, here's a historical sprinkle. Ancient Greek fishermen really did carry small repair kits on long voyages. They patched nets constantly, sometimes fashioning replacements from scraps of rope or even strips of cloth. Folklorists point out that many myths about magical nets grew from this reality. For example, Homer's unbreakable net of Hephaestus may have roots in the everyday miracle of patching frayed lines until they somehow held strong against the sea. The giant weaves while sharing his own legend. He tells of a fisherman who once mended a net so finely it caught not fish, but the very stars. Each twinkle, he claims, was a soul lost at sea, shining through the ropes until dawn freed them again. The sailors chuckle at the idea, but one of them, eyes darker than the rest, just nods slowly, as though the tale has hooked something inside him. And here's where debate sneaks in. Scholars still argue whether these nets of the cosmos were meant literally, or if they were simply metaphors for constellations. Did ancient people imagine Orion's belt as a fisher's rope, or were they reminding themselves that no matter how wide the ocean, the sky was its mirror? No one agrees, but in this moment, the myth feels more real than the seawater still drying on your skin. The sailors take turns trying the net making. Their efforts are clumsy. One manages to tangle himself so badly that he looks like tomorrow's catch. The giant laughs gently, lifting him free without judgment, as if to say, mistakes are just knots waiting for patience. Someone jokes that he'd rather be a star in the net than a sardine in a barrel. And you, watching, realize something. This isn't just about fixing rope. It's about fixing people. Every lesson from the giant seems to circle back to that. His kindness isn't loud. It's woven, like those threads, into moments so small they almost slip past unnoticed. When the net is finished, he hangs it by the cavern entrance. Light spills through it, each hole glowing like its own tiny constellation. The sailors gasp, and one whispers, "Looks like it caught dawn itself." The giant only shrugs, pretending it's no big deal, but his eyes gleam like he knows he's given them another story to carry. The tide outside grows louder, like it's impatient for departure. The sailors glance at each other, half ready to leave, half reluctant to step away from this improbable teacher. One mutters that Poseidon himself would charge rent for lessons like these. Another wonders if they can persuade the giant to come along as their permanent navigator. The giant only smiles, untangling a final knot in the net, as though he's untangling their hesitation too. His voice is soft when he says, "Every sailor must mend his own path. I only show the stitches." The words hang in the morning air, heavier than the salt breeze, lighter than the gull's cry overhead. And just like that, the cavern doesn't feel like a shelter anymore. It feels like a classroom, or maybe even a chapel, where wisdom is handed out like bread fresh from the oven.
The sea waits. You can hear it, steady and patient, as if it knows the sailors will eventually return to its wide, restless back. But before anyone moves, the giant clears his throat. It's a sound that vibrates the walls, a little like boulders rolling together, and suddenly every sailor straightens as though they're back in temple school. He begins to tell another story, not with words at first, but with gestures. His huge hand sweeps through the air, drawing invisible shapes, and you realize he's sketching constellations. Long before maps, he explains, sailors carried the stars in their pockets. He points to where dawn thins the cavern roof, and a few last stars still cling to the sky. He traces Orion, his belt shining faintly, then sweeps to the Pleiades, those 7 sisters so small they're easy to miss unless you're looking carefully. He explains how Greek sailors trusted these stars more than any compass. The historical hook here: constellations like the Pleiades were seasonal markers. When they vanished from the sky in spring, it meant it was time to plant crops. When they reappeared in autumn, it was safe to sail again. Ancient poets like Hesiod used these celestial cues like a farmer's almanac long before ink touched parchment. But then the giant folds in myth. He tells how Zeus placed the Pleiades in the sky to protect them from hunters. "Some say they're still running," he rumbles. "Their footsteps the flicker you see on clear nights." The sailors laugh softly. One nudges another. "Running from hunters? Sounds like us running from debt collectors." The giant chuckles, pleased at their cheek. Someone else adds, "If the stars can run forever, maybe we can outpace Poseidon's temper." And here comes the scholarly debate. Were constellations named first by farmers or by seafarers? Some argue the land shaped the stories. Others say it was the sea. Folklorists still shrug at the question, unwilling to commit. The truth likely drifts somewhere in between, like driftwood caught between waves and shore. The giant leans down, closer now, his breath warm and smelling faintly of seaweed and smoke. He murmurs, "The sky is a net too, if you learn to read it." And you realize this ties back to the net he wove earlier, the idea that both rope and stars are patterns waiting for meaning. To make the lesson stick, he scoops up a piece of charcoal from the fire and begins sketching on the cave wall. His drawings are crude but recognizable, star patterns turned into maps. He hands the charcoal to one sailor, who tries to add a fish, but ends up with something that looks more like a goat sneezing. The laughter that follows bounces warmly across the cavern ceiling. But when the laughter dies down, the sailors study the marks seriously. For a moment, their banter quiets, and you can almost see the weight of responsibility settle back on their shoulders. They know they'll need these maps, these myths, soon enough. One sailor whispers, "So the sky tells us where home is." Another replies, "Or maybe it just reminds us we're never truly lost." The giant doesn't correct either of them. Instead, he lets silence fill in the gaps, like mortar between stones. By now, the light outside has grown stronger, painting the horizon in soft streaks of pink and gold. The giant glances that way and nods. It's his silent signal that their time here is thinning, like stars fading into daylight. Yet, before anyone rises, he presses his palm gently against the drawings on the wall. For an instant, it looks like he's sealing them there, anchoring the sailor's memory so it won't wash away with the tide. You realize you'll remember it too. A cavern classroom where constellations became road maps, and a giant with smoke on his breath taught you that the night sky isn't just decoration, it's guidance stitched in light.
The sailors shuffled toward the cavern mouth, but the giant isn't finished yet. He raises one hand, palm broad as a sail, and gestures for them to sit again. They obey, half grumbling, but secretly relieved. They aren't quite ready to leave their odd sanctuary. This time, instead of nets or stars, he brings out something unexpected. A handful of shells. They glisten with faint blues and pinks, damp with morning mist. He scatters them on the rock like dice, and the sailors lean forward as though expecting a game. You can read the sea, the giant explains, not only with eyes on the sky, but with ears to the shore. He picks up one shell, pressing it to his ear, and the low hum inside is amplified tenfold in his cavernous hand. This is the sea's memory. It tells you where it's been. A sailor scoffs gently. Or it just tells us we've all gone mad. Another grabs a shell, listens, and then insists he hears not just the sea, but a woman humming. The others laugh, but soon each is lost in their own listening, as if the shells might indeed hold secrets. Here's the factual gem. Ancient Greek mariners often read coastal clues, sound, shape, even the smell of wind, to tell where they were. Early travelers noted that sailors could identify harbors by the unique echo of waves against cliffs. Some scholars suggest that myths about singing shells or voices of sirens grew from this very practice. And the debate? Folklorists still argue whether siren songs were pure invention or inspired by real acoustic quirks at sea. Some bays really do create echoes that sound uncannily like singing. Was it science or storytelling? No one's pinned it down. The giant spins his own tale about sirens, not monstrous temptresses, but lonely singers who wished only to guide sailors, not drown them. The sea has fewer enemies than you think, he muses. It is men who make the quarrels. The sailors glance at one another, unsure whether to laugh or nod. One mutters, "I'd believe that if the sea hadn't just swallowed half our provisions." Another replies, "Maybe it was hungry too." Even the giant chuckles at that. Then, with deliberate care, he arranges the shells into a spiral. It mirrors the whirlpools that lurk in legend, Charybdis, for example, who swallowed whole ships with a gulp. The sailors shift uneasily at the symbol, but the giant soothes them with his voice. "A whirlpool is only water learning to dance," he says. It's hard to argue with that when you're staring at seashells arranged in delicate patterns on stone. You realize the lesson isn't about superstition or danger. It's about perspective, choosing to see the sea not as predator, but as partner.
The sailors pocket a few shells, tucking them away like charms. One jokes, "If Poseidon asks why we're late, I'll just say the shells told us to stay." Another murmurs that he'll keep his close to remind him that even storms leave behind treasures. By now, the cavern feels less like a hiding place and more like a treasury of small, peculiar wisdoms. Nets, stars, shells, ordinary things transformed into guides. You realize the giant hasn't given them a map home, but something better, a way to read the world for themselves. As the tide swells louder outside, the giant closes his fist around the last shell, then gently places it at the sailor's feet. He says, "Take it, not for luck, for listening." The gift feels weightier than it should, as though the whole ocean is folded inside its hollow curve.
The tide has crept high enough that spray now flicks through the cavern entrance, cool and salty, like the sea reminding everyone it still holds the schedule. The sailors shuffle to their feet at last, shoulders bent under the reality of departure. Yet they hesitate, glancing back at the giant as though leaving a teacher mid-lesson. The giant seems to sense this. He rises, towering above them, but there's no intimidation in his bulk, only a quiet sadness that they must go. He reaches for something in the shadows, a massive oar, carved from driftwood so bleached it looks almost like bone. It's comically huge, far beyond what the sailors could ever use. Still, he rests it gently across the cavern floor, as if presenting an offering. "You don't need this," he says, voice low, "but you should see it." The oar is covered in etchings, spirals, waves, fish, suns, moons. It's not art for beauty alone. It's a history carved into wood. He explains how every storm he's witnessed, every shipwreck he's mourned, every sailor he's guided, has been etched here, stroke by patient stroke. Here's the historical anchor. Archaeologists really have found carved oars and paddles from ancient cultures, sometimes ceremonial, sometimes practical. Greek sailors, too, decorated their tools with protective symbols, believing each mark carried a fragment of divine favor. The giant tells them one story in particular, of a ship that lost its way and drifted for weeks. The sailors had no food left, no faith either, until they followed dolphins that swam beside them day after day, leading them to shore. He points to a carving of dolphins spiraling around waves, their fins almost glowing in the firelight. Scholars still debate whether tales of dolphins guiding ships were poetic invention or accounts of real encounters. Dolphins are known to follow vessels, sometimes even herding fish near them. Was it rescue, coincidence, or hopeful storytelling? The debate rages like a storm that never quite makes landfall. The sailors touch the oar with reverence, fingers tracing grooves. One murmurs, "This wood holds more memory than my whole family line." Another jokes, "If I carved every storm I've been through, I'd need a tree the size of Crete." The laughter softens the solemnity, but the awe lingers. The giant lifts the oar again, balancing it in one hand as though it weighs nothing, then sets it back in its resting place. "Every journey deserves to be remembered," he says, "not because it was grand, but because it was yours." The words strike the sailors differently. Some nod, some blink too quickly, as though hiding emotion. You feel it too, that tug reminding you that memory isn't just for scholars in marble halls. It's for anyone willing to etch their story somewhere, even if only in another person's mind. Outside, gulls shriek,
impatient heralds for departure. The sailors finally shoulder their gear, pockets heavy with shells, heads full of stars, hands still remembering the net's weave. They look smaller now, not in stature, but in comparison to the weight of lessons pressed into them like carvings on that oar. Before they leave, the giant kneels, bringing his face closer to theirs. "Remember," he murmurs, "the sea is not your enemy. It is your mirror." Then he smiles, broad, kind, a little crooked, and waves them on. The sailors file out slowly, like schoolchildren dragging their feet after recess. The light swallows them one by one, until only you and the giant remain in the cavern's hush. You notice him sigh, a sound as deep as a shifting tide, and for a fleeting second you wonder who guides him when he's the one left behind.
Outside the cavern, the day greets you with a brilliance that feels almost theatrical. The sun has climbed high, scattering light across the water like shards of glass, dazzling enough to make the sailors squint. They pause on the rocks, caught between awe and nerves, as if stepping back into the sea feels like leaving a warm hearth for a cold road. The giant follows, his footsteps thudding softly on the stone, and the contrast strikes you. This massive figure moving with the care of a parent helping children cross a street. He kneels at the shoreline, dipping his hand into the surf. The water swirls around his palm, catching light as though the sea itself acknowledges his touch. "You'll see signs," he says, voice quieter here, as though the open sky deserves softer tones. "Birds flying inland before storms. Fish leaping in arcs that point to calmer waters. Foam on the waves that tells you of hidden rocks." The sailors exchange looks, half skeptical, half spellbound. One mutters, "I thought foam only meant Poseidon had indigestion." Another snorts, "If fish are pointing the way, I want to hire one as captain." The giant chuckles, unbothered by their teasing. Here's the historical seam. Greek sailors really did read the sea this way. Aristotle himself noted how animals foretold weather, and fishermen passed down knowledge of currents through gestures, not scrolls. This sea literacy was more oral tradition than science, but it saved lives. He gestures to a flock of gulls circling farther out. "There," he says, "see how they hover in place? It means shallow waters with fish below." The sailors crane their necks, squinting like kids pretending to understand a math lesson. One finally admits, "I'll believe it when one of those gulls hands me dinner." Then the giant's tone shifts. He shares a legend of Nereus, the old man of the sea, who could foretell truth, but only if caught. Some say he changed shapes to escape: lion, serpent, water itself. Others say he's simply tired of answering men's questions. Folklorists argue endlessly about Nereus. Was he a symbol of the sea's unpredictability, or a memory of ancient weather readers who seemed like prophets to common sailors? Some call him myth, others think he was a story crafted to honor the wisdom of fishermen who knew the sea better than scholars ever could. The sailors are hooked now, asking questions rapid fire. "What shape would you turn into?" one asks. The giant thinks a moment, then grins. "Probably a loaf of bread. Everyone chases bread." The laughter that follows is hearty, spilling over the waves. But the humor doesn't erase the gravity. You can see in their faces that the sailors are memorizing his signs, the gulls, the fish, the foam, not as lore, but as tools, lifelines disguised as bedtime stories. One sailor scoops a handful of water, lets it pour through his fingers, and whispers, "It's true, isn't it? The sea talks. We just don't always listen." The giant nods,
his shadow stretching long across the tide. For a moment, it looks like his shape blends with the waves, as though he belongs to them more than to the land. Then, gently, he stands, his massive frame outlined by the horizon. He says, "Go. You have the sea to read now, and it has you." The sailors don't move right away. They linger, staring up at him, perhaps realizing that leaving isn't just stepping back onto the ocean, it's stepping away from the rare comfort of being guided. Finally, with reluctant grins and muttered jokes about who'll trip first boarding the boat, they begin to wade into the shallows. The giant watches, hands folded, a sentinel of kindness. And you know, even before they're gone, that his lessons will follow them longer than any compass could.
The sailors climb aboard their patched-up vessel with all the grace of goats trying ballet. Planks creak, ropes groan, and one man nearly falls in before another yanks him back by the collar. The giant watches it all with a patient smile, as though this bumbling ritual is part of the journey itself. He steps into the surf, water lapping around his knees. From here he looks impossibly tall, a figure cut from horizon and myth. He raises one arm, not in command, but in farewell. "You will lose your way again," he calls. The sailors freeze, half alarmed, half curious. Then he adds, with a grin, "But that's the only way to find new places." The tension breaks. Laughter ripples across the deck. Someone shouts, "If getting lost is part of the plan, we're already experts." Here's the historical nugget. Greek sailors often accepted being lost as part of the voyage. Their maps were more like vague sketches than precise charts, leaving much to imagination and improvisation. In fact, some scholars argue that Odysseus's epic wanderings were less about punishment from the gods and more about reflecting the reality of seafaring life, constant detours, unknown lands, endless surprises. The giant wades deeper until the sea climbs his waist. He places both hands on the sailor's boat and, with startling gentleness, pushes. The ship glides forward, steady as if guided by a hidden current. The sailors gape, torn between gratitude and the sudden realization that their departure feels too final. He tells them one last story about the Argo, Jason's famed ship, which carried a piece of sacred oak from Dodona, a tree said to speak with Zeus's own voice. "That ship never truly sailed alone," the giant says. "Its wood whispered the way." Folklorists still debate whether the Argo's talking timber was meant literally or metaphorically. Was it divine navigation or just a reminder that even ships are built from living things, carrying memory in their grain? The argument drifts through scholarly texts like a stubborn tide. The sailors glance at the planks beneath their feet, suddenly aware of the creaks and groans in the wood. One mutters, "If our boat starts talking, I hope it knows more jokes than the captain." Another pats the railing and says, "Whisper kindly, old girl. We've already heard enough yelling from Poseidon." The boat drifts farther, pulled by tide as much as by oars. The giant's figure grows smaller, though still impossibly grand against the horizon. He doesn't shout now, just lifts his hand once more, a silent benediction. And you realize, standing there in spirit with the sailors, that his farewell isn't about leaving them with certainty. It's about leaving them with courage to face uncertainty. One sailor, quieter than the rest, whispers, "Do you think we'll ever see him again?" Another answers, "Maybe if we don't, that's the point." The ship slips farther into the swell. The giant's figure is a silhouette now, blending with the meeting line of sky and sea until you can't tell whether he's still standing there or whether he's always been part of the ocean itself.
The sea welcomes the sailors back like an old friend with a mischievous streak. Waves slap against the hull, not harshly, just enough to remind them that this isn't dry land anymore. The men settle into rhythm, oars dipping in time, their voices lower now, tempered by the weight of what they've learned. You notice it almost immediately. They look at the water differently. Where once they saw only endless blue, now they spot signs, the gulls circling in the distance, the foam gathering along a hidden reef, the way a current tugs more insistently on one side of the boat. Their eyes are sharper, not with fear, but with a quiet confidence stitched together from nets, stars, shells, and stories. One sailor pulls the shell from his pocket and presses it to his ear. He grins, then hands it to the man beside him. Soon they're passing around like contraband, each swearing they hear something new. Laughter, a wave breaking, a voice humming from far away. The shell has become less an object and more a reminder of listening, of patience, of the giant's lesson that even the sea's smallest murmur deserves attention. And here's the scholarly echo. Myths often turned ordinary tools into talismans. A net wasn't just a net, it was a cosmic trap. A shell wasn't just a shell, it was a song. Scholars still debate whether this was superstition or a clever way to keep sailors attentive. Either way, the line between magic and practicality blurred every time a ship left shore. As night begins to fall again, the sailors glance skyward. The constellations emerge like old friends, Orion, the Pleiades, the endless river of the Milky Way. Someone jokes, "There's our bread-shaped giant, probably up there by now." Another replies, "If he is, I hope he's baking." Laughter ripples across the deck, lighter than the waves. The ship sails on, and though the giant is gone from sight, his presence lingers in every ripple, every gust, every shared glance among men who feel less lost than before. You can almost sense him still, a shadow trailing just beyond the horizon, waiting to help the next band of sailors who stumble into his cave. The wind carries the faintest sound, a laugh, deep and rolling, or maybe just the sea itself. Either way, you smile. You know the difference doesn't matter. The kindness is what remains.
The journey settles into quiet now, and so should you. Imagine yourself leaning back, the wooden creak of the ship beneath you soft as a rocking chair. The waves no longer push or pull, they cradle. The stars overhead do not demand your attention. They simply shimmer, like night lamps left on for comfort. The sailors are safe, drifting on waters that no longer feel hostile, but familiar, like a road home. Their laughter fades into murmurs, and then into silence, each man sinking into a kind of peace only possible when you know you've been cared for, even if just for a short time. The giant's lessons have settled inside them like warm bread in the belly, filling, grounding, gentle. Breathe slowly now. Let the rhythm of the oars become your rhythm. Let the whisper of the tide become your own breath, steady and unhurried. The world is vast, yes, but it is also tender in its own strange ways. Somewhere out there, kindness as immense as that giant waits for you too, tucked into the folds of the everyday, ready to guide you when you feel most adrift. The sea stretches endlessly, but you are not lost. You carry shells that sing, nets that hold stars, maps etched in memory. And like the sailors, you know now that even the smallest signs, the shift of a bird's wing, the flicker of starlight,
can lead you home. So let go of the day. Trust the sea of sleep to carry you where you need to go. Drift, float, rest. Good night, traveler. May your dreams be gentle and your journey always guided by unseen kindness. Kindness, kindness, kindness.